Hello, and welcome to Really Big Hat. My name is Jared, and this is Blitzkeep. This video will be an overview of Blitzkeep as a whole. I'll go over the rules, how to play, how to construct a deck, how to use all of the elements you see here in Tabletop Simulator, the whole kit and caboodle. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go over the rules here, as I have them displayed here in the corner for your perusal. And we'll just kind of go over these step by step. I'll occasionally take breaks from just reading the dry text to go give you a visual example, show you what it actually means. And yeah, let's just get into it. So Blitzkeep, as the overview states here, is a card-based strategy game. It is played on a board. You are able to construct your own deck, and then you'll use your card's various effects, move them around the board, and try and destroy your opponent's keep. That is one of the ways to win. That is the main thrust of the vibe, as it were. There are other victory types that we'll get into in a moment. But yeah, as for the basics, each card has the following elements. And let's go grab a card here real quick to show you what I'm talking about. So we got our good old friend, the Crusher Zombie. One of my favorites, one of the originals. So, each card has the following elements. A name, that'll be up here in the top left. This is a Crusher Zombie. A card type, that is going to be the word in parentheses here. There are 4 types of cards. Down here it says that. Units, weapons, utilities, and structures. Crusher Zombie here is a unit. They also have an HP stat, an attack stat, a defense stat, and a speed stat. Those are these 4 numbers right here. 6 HP, 6 attack, 4 defense, and 2 speed for our good friend, the Crusher Zombie. There are also 8 directional arrows, some of which are going to be filled in and pointing one or more directions. Those are these 8 arrows on the corners of the cards here. And as you can see, he has 3 colored in red up here at the top. The top left, the top right, and the straight ahead. If an effect would specify a card that he pointed to, it would be talking about these filled red arrows. Then each card has an effect. Crusher Zombie's effect is right here. If you have more cards in your discard pile than your opponent, this card gains 2 attack. And I've tried my darndest to keep most card effects that simple and that straightforward. There are a few that have to go into a little bit more detail. That's just kind of an inevitability of this kind of card game. But for the most part, I've tried to keep them all short, sweet, to the point. That's just a design philosophy I had when I started. I wanted the effects to be simple, easy to understand. But moving back to the basics here, each card also has a deployment cost. That is this number in the circle right here next to the name, in between the name and the stats. And Crusher Zombie's deployment cost is 2. We'll get into more about what that means in a moment. I've already gone over this point. There are 4 types of cards: units, weapons, utilities, and structures. And each card type has different properties and movement types. Units can move up to 2 spaces, either vertically or horizontally, but not diagonally. There are cards whose effects will state otherwise. And the way it works, card effects are exceptions to the rules. If the rule says one thing and a card effect says another, you go with the card effect. So we'll show you what movement would look like. So if he's on this space right here, and this will be a good way to go over all of it. He is a unit, so he can move 2 spaces, either vertically or horizontally, but not diagonally. So he could start his movement here, and then go 1, 2, and end there. If he were a weapon or a utility, he would only have 1 space of vertical or horizontal movement. So if he were a weapon or a utility, he would be able to move here from there, or, 1 space back on a subsequent turn. Structures cannot move. So if he's a structure and he were played here, he's stuck there forever. Additionally, and we'll get into these rules in a moment, units, when entering the battlefield, which is this centermost row here, it costs them 2 movement. So if the Crusher Zombie here wanted to move into the battlefield, he could do it from here to there, and that would cost him his entire movement. He could not, for example, move left and then up into the battlefield all on the same turn. If he wanted to go into the battlefield there instead of here, then what he'd have to do is spend one turn moving there, and then the next turn moving up into this space in the battlefield. So yeah, units can move up to 2 spaces vertically or horizontally, not diagonally. Weapons and utilities can move only 1 space vertically or horizontally, and structures cannot move. Next page. So each card may only move once per turn, but can attack or activate their effect multiple times per turn. There is no limit on the number of times a card can attack or use their effect, unless their effect specifically states otherwise. Some effects will have a tag that says this can be only used once per turn, or this can only be used twice per turn, but unless an effect specifically states that, you can use them as many times as you have the actions to spend. The playing surface consists of a 7x5 grid of spaces. Each space may be occupied by only 1 card at a time. So this was the grid up here, and like I said, it is 7 columns and 5 rows. There are 3 main zones of play on the grid. I've gone over this a little bit already. The 2 rows closest to each player are their territories, while the center row is the battlefield, or the BF for short. This is how it is abbreviated on card effects. And that's just so that I don't have to type out battlefield every single time. Saves space. Entering the battlefield costs units 2 movement. No card may move through the centermost space of the battlefield. So, like I said earlier, this Crusher Zombie here, if he wanted to go into the battlefield, he could go there. But if he were here, for example, you cannot occupy this centermost square. So he can't move onto this roof here, is how I have it in the art. No card can occupy that space. A player also has specific zones for their deck, discard pile, and army counters. So over here is where you keep your deck, there's your discard pile, and here are your army counters. If a player's keep is reduced to 0 HP, it is destroyed, and that player loses the game. So your keep is this card right here. They all have the same effect. I've got several different art styles for them so far. This is the zombie-themed one. And all keeps, like I said, are the same. 20 HP, 6 attack, 5 defense, 0 speed, and a non-applicable deployment cost, because every player controls a keep, but it is not a card that is in your deck. It is separate. So it does not, in fact, have a deployment cost. And every keep has the same effect. It loses 1 attack for each allied card it points to, and it loses 1 defense for each opponent's card it points to. So currently, if this were your board state, you have a keep here and a Crusher Zombie here, your keep is losing 1 attack because it's pointing to this Crusher Zombie, so it would be down to 5. And then let's pull one of these guys out. Let's say there's an enemy card there. So there's that Dwarf Explorer. Since she would be here, the keep would also be losing 1 defense. So it would be down to 5 attack because it's pointing to the Crusher Zombie, and 4 defense because it's pointing to the Dwarf Explorer. Also, next victory type, if a player's deck runs out of cards, that player loses the game. This happens immediately upon drawing or discarding the final card of the deck. So, once again, let's say we were playing with our zombies. We were down to just the Crusher Zombie, and the rest of our deck was here in the discard. And we were either forced to discard the Crusher Zombie, or we foolishly decided to play him in this space. The second your deck hits 0 like that, you immediately lose. And then the third and final victory type, if a player fills all 7 spaces in their back row with structures, they win the game at the end of their opponent's next turn, provided they still control all 7 structures. If they do not, the game continues. So, we'll use the Dwarf deck to illustrate this, because they actually have an available structure victory, and we're just going to go searching for some. So, let's say that we were actually playing the Dwarf deck. We'll keep the keep with the zombie theme. It doesn't really matter. But if we were playing this deck and we had these cards in all of these spaces, that is 7 structures across the back, that does include the keep, then at the end of the opponent's next turn, if we still control all of these structures in all of these spaces, we win the game. So if we filled all these spaces, and then let's say, well, in this scenario, the zombies are over there, and they're playing the other deck. We'll just use the entire deck since I accidentally picked up the whole thing. Now, here, let's pull the Crusher Zombie out. So, let's say on our turn, we fill up our back row of structures like this. On their turn, well, they've got a Crusher Zombie here, and they're just going to attack and destroy this tavern, for example. Then, we don't win on the spot. We would have to wait until our next turn, play another structure from the deck, presumably, and then, let's say in this scenario, we've been able to fight the zombies off and they can't get to us. At the end of their turn, we win. Play continues in turns until one player is declared the winner or eliminated. So to get started, each player will construct a deck that adds up to a deployment cost of exactly 60. When constructing a deck, player may include cards of the same name up to a total deployment cost of 6. So that would be 6 copies of a card with 1 deployment cost, 3 copies of a card with 2 deployment costs, or 2 copies of a card with 3 deployment cost. You may also include a single card with a deployment cost of 6 in your deck. So to show how that would work, let's go ahead and just get rid of all this here. And we'll pull out our giant pile of every single card. So I'm going to flip them over. It's a little easier that way, so that when we pull them out, they'll be face up and we can see what we're working with. So we're going to look at this. This is a comprehensive list of every card that I currently have in the game. I will be adding cards as development continues. Right now I have about 80 or so unique cards, I believe. But the way this will work is you'll pull out this big pile if you want to construct your own deck. The workshop will have the dwarf deck and the zombie deck over here if you just want to grab one and play quickly. But in terms of constructing a deck, you'll pull this open and you'll go through the list here. And you'll decide which cards sound cool. So let's say we want to grab a full set of these Beastfolk Cleric. Since they are 2 deployment costs, we can have up to 3 of them in the deck. Let's say that we want all 3 of those, so that's a deployment cost of 6. This is actually pretty easy to track if you always use the maximum number of each individual card. Like if you get all the Beastfolk Clerics and then you get 9 other full sets of cards that add up to 6 deployment cost, you'll have 10 uniquely named cards in your deck when you get to a deployment cost of 60. That's an easy way to keep track, especially when you're just starting out. So if you just choose 10 cards that seem cool, and you just grab the full deployment cost of all of them, so we'll just start grabbing stuff off the top here. So, as you can see here, we have 10 uniquely named cards, and since we're at the full deployment cost of each, all of these piles are going to add up to 6 deployment cost. 6 times 10, 60. Very easy. So this would be our deck. So we'd just stack all these up. And there you go. And you may have noticed, those observant among you, that the way this works is different decks will have different deck sizes at the end of this. You're working with a deployment cost, not a card number. So the way the math works out, a deck can have as few as 19 cards or as many as 60. So yes, back to getting started. To start the game, each player will place a keep in the centermost space in the rearmost row of their territory. So let's go back to the pile here, and we will pull out a couple of keeps. Just scroll down to them. So here they all are. And we'll grab this one because it looks cool, and we'll give the other player this one because it also looks cool. I'm also just going to go ahead and grab out another quick deck for the opponent to have, just to show how this will work. So, to begin play, you'll put your deck in its zone. You'll put a keep here. Your opponent will put a keep there. And this will be how the board will look when you're ready to start playing. Yep. To begin the game, each player shuffles their deck and draws 3 cards from the top. Then they place those cards face down in spaces adjacent to their keep, adhering to the normal rules of card deployment, which I will cover in the next point. Both players flip their cards face up at the same time, then compare the total speed of all 3 of their cards with their opponents. Player who has the higher speed total goes first. In the event of a tie, roll a 6-sided die, and the player with the higher result goes first. So, to show how that will look, we've both selected our deck, placed it appropriately. We've both placed a keep in its designated zone, which is right here in the middle. Then we will draw 3 cards from our deck. So I'm just going to shuffle this real quick, and we'll go ahead and just draw 3 cards. So these are all units, so that makes it pretty easy to place them. But I'll go over what to do if some of them were structures. So what we will do is we will place these face down in a space adjacent to our keep. So that is going to be these 5 squares that are viable placement points for our initial cards. So since these were all units, we could place it like that. If they were all structures, we would have to place it like this, because structures, when they're played, have to be vertically or horizontally adjacent to another structure. Units, when they're played at the beginning of the game, can go anywhere adjacent to a structure, even diagonally. And that also applies to weapons and utilities as well. It's only structures that must be vertically or horizontally adjacent to another structure. Now, during play, so on your turn, if you draw a unit, which, this will be, you can place a unit adjacent to any other unit that is in your territory, as long as the new unit is also in your territory. So if we didn't move at all on our first turn, and our board looked like this, and we drew a unit, we could place them here, 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 or here, because we can either place them adjacent to the keep here, which is the normal deployment, but we can also place them anywhere adjacent to another unit, as long as we place the new unit in our territory as well. So these 2 spots would also be viable placements. If these cards were here and here, we could place this new unit anywhere in our territory, because all of these spaces would be adjacent to either a unit or a structure. And that's how that would go. But, to go back to setting up the game, we'll put our 3 cards out how we wish. The other player, okay, that's a structure. That's a structure. And that's a unit, so he can go there. So the other player would set up their board as well, and then at the same time, both players will flip all of their cards face up. Then we'll compare speeds. I already know that this this player is going first, because that is 1, 2, 3, and then 4 for a total of 7. And over there they have 1, because these 2 are structures, and structures all have 0 speed. So 7 is higher than 1, so this player would go first. At the same time, however, and this is a pretty unique feature, you also flip up your deck. Your deck goes face up as well. So both players can see what they're about to draw and what their opponent is about to draw. And that's how you set up to start playing. So this will be what the board state looks like right before whichever player is going first is ready to take their first turn. So this goes over the deployment rules that I just went over. Units, weapons, and utilities may be placed in any space adjacent to a structure you control at the start of the game or when drawn. Structures must be placed either vertically or horizontally adjacent to either your keep or another structure you control. When you draw units on your turn, you can also place them adjacent to another unit you control in your territory, as long as the drawn unit is also in your territory when deployed. Then we both flip our decks face up, so the top card is face up and readable. Either player may check their opponent's deck at any time to see the top card. We just went over all of that. But there that is in the rules. I didn't just make that up on the spot. I promise. I mean, I did make this all up, so technically I could make something up on the spot, and that'd be a rule now. But I promise I won't do that. And if I do, I will stop recording this video, write the rule down, and then reshoot the video with the new rule in mind. Oh, but anyway. So now it's going to go over what you can do on your turn. Player has 3 actions per turn. These actions can be used to move a card, declare an attack, activate a card's effect, shuffle their deck, or draw a card. Drawing a card must be the last action taken on a turn. On each player's first turn, they must draw a card as their final action. But after that, it is up to the player to decide whether or not to use their action to draw. Whenever you draw a card from the deck, it is immediately played. Player must follow the standard deployment rules for the card type, placing it in an appropriate space. If no suitable space exists, you may choose to discard one of the cards in one of those spaces and replace it with a new card. Otherwise, you just can't draw a card. On each player's turn, at the start of their turn, they gain 1 army counter. We'll get into what those can do here in a moment. A player may control a maximum of 12, and they may be used to power certain cards' effects, and may also be used in the following ways. We'll get to that in just a moment. I want to show you what all this would look like first. So, we will continue with this game being set up with these 2 decks. So the final thing you would actually do is you would each grab one of these d20s, set it to 20 to keep track of your keep's remaining HP. You don't technically have to use these if you want to keep track another way, but this is quick and easy, and it's just a useful way to keep track. So once those are both set up there, this player would be going first, so let's walk through their first turn and what a turn looks like. So first things first, every turn you get 1 army counter. I've got all these nice, neat little spaces here for them. You can put them in whatever space you want. I usually try and stack them from the bottom to the top like so, but really you could mix and match. You could put them wherever you want. There's no real rule for that. It's just how bad is your OCD, and how badly do you want to make sure it's a nice, neat pattern. That's just up to you. But you do get 1 army counter at the start of each of your turns. You can get them in other ways from certain card effects, and you can also lose them in certain ways to card effects. You can also spend some to activate certain card effects. There's a lot of ways to use army counters. They also have their own effects that are just inherent to them, but we'll get to that in a moment. So this player is going first. They've got their army counter, and you have 3 actions on each one of your turns. You can use an action to move a card, so you could use an action to move her over here, if you wanted. You could use an action to move him over here. You could use an action to move him there. All of that would cost 1 action each time you move 1 card. So if your first turn wanted to look like this, where you just wanted to spread out, it would be 1 action to move the Elf Assassin over there, 1 action to move the Dwarf Berserker over there. And then since it would be your first turn, your final action would have to be to draw this Dwarf Berserker. Now, I'm actually going to move a little bit differently because I also want to move on to explaining combat in a moment. So our first turn is actually going to look like this. And this is a pretty unique interaction. Since this card can move diagonally, it can spend its movement to enter the battlefield here. So that'll be both spaces of its movement to move this 1 space diagonally, because entering the battlefield costs units 2 movement. But she's going to use her first move to move there. Second move is going to be the Dwarf Berserker is also going to move up aggressively, and then third action has to be to draw a card. And I'm going to place this Dwarf Berserker there. So that would be this player's entire first turn. Then the next player would go, and they would follow suit. So we'll just rotate around here, and we'll say that that happens. Oh, technically, I haven't really been playing this out the way it would actually go, but there is an effect over here that would have triggered. Any card that ends its movement in this card's column takes 3 damage, so this Dwarf Berserker would have taken 3 damage by ending its movement right there, next to this Desert Sanctum. We're not going to track that right now, but I did notice it when I whipped around to this side, so I thought I'd mention it. But we'll say that this player is just going to be like super duper defensive for absolutely no reason, make completely incorrect tactical moves, and he's just going to make no action other than to just draw a card and pass the turn. Technically, also would have gotten an army counter, so we'll just swing back over here for demonstration purposes, however. So that's what both players' first turns could look like. You get 3 actions. It'll be 1, 2, 3 for us, and they decided to just pass their first 2 actions and do nothing but draw a card. That does end your turn. There are some exceptions to that, which we'll get to in a moment, but I already did go over the rule earlier. Drawing a card has to be the final action you take on a turn. So, we'll go over here, and we're going to start explaining army counters, and then we're going to explain combat. So, army counters have several effects. They are listed here. Firstly, a player may spend 3 army counters to gain an additional action on their turn. Player may do this as many times in one turn as they wish, provided they have enough army counters to spend. There is a counterplay to that as well. A player may also respond to their opponent trading in their army counters for an additional action by spending 3 army counters to cause their opponent to lose that action. Their opponent still loses the army counters they spent. So the way that would work, and we'll just set this up like so. Let's say I have 3 army counters here. They have 3 army counters there. And let's say I wanted to do a bunch of stuff on my turn. Let's say I wanted to move him there. I wanted to move him there. I wanted to move him there. That would be my first 3 actions. Then I would go to spend these 3 army counters to get an additional action, because I also want to move her all the way back here. So I would spend those to get an additional action. My opponent then has the choice to spend their 3 in response to say no. It's like, I'm going to spend my 3, you don't get that additional action. So now we've spent our 3 actions, and our turn is going to have to end there. We're going to pass the turn back to the opponent. This is a tactical decision that would have to be made in the moment every time. Because let's say we spend our 3 army counters, and all we're doing is trying to move back here. Then our opponent would still have their 3 on their turn if they didn't spend them to stop it. Then they could use theirs to get another action as well, and we wouldn't have the army counters to stop them. So there's a little bit of give and take there, and it's a nuance that you'll pick up on when you should stop it, when you shouldn't. But it's a pretty interesting element of the game, is balancing how to use your army counters. Do you use them aggressively? Do you use them defensively? Do you try and stack up a bunch to get to more effects, which we'll get to in a second? In fact, let's go back to that. So, if a player controls at least 6 army counters, they may draw a card at any point during their turn, spending an action as usual, but it does not need to be their final action in a turn. You can still only draw 1 card per turn this way, it still counts for your draw, and you still have to follow the normal deployment rules. So, let's say we go back over here. Whoops. Say I've got 6 army counters, and it's the start of my turn. So what I can do is I can now draw at any time during the turn. It doesn't have to be in my last action anymore. So my first move could be, I'm going to draw this card. That's still my 1 draw per turn, so I can't spend my next action to draw this card. But I could action 1, draw this guy. Action 2, start moving him up. Action 3, declare an attack. And then I could even go further and spend 3 at a time to get 2 more actions and just keep going. So it's a very powerful position to be in, to have 6 army counters ready to go and be able to interrupt your turn with a draw. It opens up a lot of different plays that you wouldn't usually have access to. And then the last thing with army counters, if you control all 12, you may search your deck at any time during your turn, put whichever cards you like on top. So you can, if you have all 12 army counters, you can just go to your deck at any time, stack it however you like. It's not only the top card that you can change and then you have to shuffle the rest or anything like that. You can arrange your deck however you want. And yeah, that's your reward for getting to 12 army counters. Next, we move on to declaring attacks and combat. So any card is able to attack any opponent's card that is in an adjacent space, including diagonally, and the card does not need to have a filled arrow pointing at the attack's target. So we'll go back up here, and we're actually going to move this around like that. So this elf assassin could attack this honored squire there, even though she doesn't have an arrow pointing to him, because he's in an adjacent space. And any card may declare attacks. That includes structures. So if this guy were down here next to the keep itself can declare attacks on him as well, because it is a card you control, and there is a enemy card in an adjacent space, which makes it a viable target for your attacks. So the way combat is going to work, let's go at it roll by roll. So when a card declares an attack, we first compare the attacking card's attack stat to the defending card's defense stat, and we deal the differences damage. Then, if the attacking card has a filled arrow that is pointing to the defending card, the attacking card automatically adds 1 damage to the attack's total damage, even if the attack were going to deal 0 damage. This is referred to as the directional attack bonus, and the extra damage from pointing to the defending card only applies if the defending card is adjacent to the attacking card at damage calculation. So some cards can attack from 2 spaces away. So let's pretend this guy was one of them. He's not, but let's pretend he was. So if he could attack from 2 spaces away, he could also attack the honored squire. However, even though he has a red arrow pointing directly at it, it is not in an adjacent space. So it would just be his 6 attack minus the honored squire's 4 defense, and he would take 2 damage from that attack. Conversely, if he were adjacent, then it would be the 6 attack minus the 4 defense, but then you would also add 1 damage because he has a filled arrow pointing to the defending card. So instead of just 2 damage, that would do 3 damage. And then, just to further illustrate, like if this elf assassin wanted to attack this honored squire from this position, it'd be the 6 attack minus 4 defense. Doesn't have an arrow pointing to it, so that it would also just be 2 damage per attack. Whenever a card attacks another card, this is referred to as combat. That's how I usually try to word it in card effects, so you know what I'm talking about. Like if something says at the end of combat, do X, or during combat, this card gains yada yada. That's what I'm talking about. It's the act of one card attacking another until the resolution of damage. That is all referred to as combat. So, if, after combat, an attacking card has reduced the defending card's HP to 0, the defending card is destroyed and must be discarded. The attacking card may then choose to occupy the space the defending card was in. This does not cost that card its movement for the turn, and it does not consume an additional action. The movement can also only apply if the attacking card was adjacent to the defending card at the time of the battle. So, once again, coming back to these examples, let's once again move this guy back here and pretend he's a ranged attacker. Let's say he attacks and destroys the honored squire from range. It would be discarded, it would die, it would go here into the discard pile, but he would not be able to occupy that card's space because he was not adjacent at the time it was destroyed. However, if we move him up and say he attacks and destroys his honored squire, it would be discarded, and then he would have the option whether or not he wants to occupy that card's previous position. You don't have to, it is an option. It doesn't cost an action, it doesn't cost the card its movement. So, for example, if he had been here at the start of the turn, he had used his first action to move, and then second action to attack, and let's say that attack was going to do lethal damage. the squire would be destroyed, and he would have the opportunity to then take its previous position. There is also no limit on how many times a turn you can do that. So if he were then to attack again, and attack this Desert Sanctum, for example, and destroyed it, it would also die, and he would also have the option to take its previous position. So that's what you're able to do before, during, after combat. If the defending card's defense stat is higher than the attacking card's attack stat, and the defending card has a filled arrow pointing to the attacking card, the attacking card takes a difference as damage. But if the attacking card is destroyed after combat, the defending card does not get the opportunity to occupy the attacking card's previous space. These are rare edge cases. So let's say, for example, something was buffing the keep's defense to let's say 10. And then I tried to attack it with this Elf Assassin from this position. Since the keep would have 10 defense against the Elf Assassin's 6 attack, the keep is actually going to do 4 damage to the Elf Assassin. The directional attack bonus will also apply, so even though the Elf Assassin's attack was going to do 0 damage, it would also do 1 damage to the keep. So the way that would work out, if the Elf Assassin decided to declare that attack against, a card with 10 defense that's pointing to it, it would do 1 damage to them, and it would do 4 damage to her. That is, like I said, going to be a very rare edge case that you're attacking a card that somehow has more defense than you have attack. That is, like I said, that in itself is rare, and then it's going to be even more rare that you would want to. You would know that before combat, so you would have to have a good reason for doing that, probably. So it's not going to come up that often, but there's rules for it, just in case it does. Then there are also a couple of miscellaneous rules to go over here. If an effect of a card specifies removing a card from play, you place the affected card face down off of the game board. So let's say there was an effect that removed a card from your discard from play to do something. Let's say this Crusher Zombie's in the discard, and effect says to remove him from play. You would just move him off the table, flip him over, put him down over there. And that's just to keep you from confusing him with any active game piece, basically. Unlike games like Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh!, once a card is quote-unquote exiled, quote-unquote banished, in this game I've just used the term removed from play, there is nothing in this game that is going to bring him back from being removed from play. And if I've got anything to say about it, there never will be. But yeah, that is that's just how to take that game action there. And then last but not least, in the event of a draw, so for example, both players being eliminated at the same time, the player whose attack or ability initiated the draw is declared the winner. So for example, if an effect forces both players to discard the last card from their deck, the players whose card activated that effect is the winner. If the draw is the result of cards or effects controlled by both players activating simultaneously, so for example, both players control a card which forces the other player to discard the last card from their deck on the same triggered condition, so if both players have a card that says, if any card declares an attack, discard the top card of your opponent's deck, or something, and they both have one card in their deck, and a card declares an attack, and they both have to discard the last card of their deck, that game will end in a true draw. Once again, as the game currently sits, I don't think there are any cards that will actually do that. However, it's a scenario that I could envision potentially happening, depending on how I decide to design card effects moving forward, so I made a roll for it, just in case it ever comes up. But that is pretty much everything you need to know about how to play Blitzkeep. I think the only thing I haven't really gone over here is these HP counters, all these different die. The green ones are for tracking card HP. And once again, these aren't necessary. So let's say this guy had taken 4 attack damage. I would just grab one of these green dies to track his HP and put it down to 2 to say, hey, he has 2 HP left. Additionally, like, he actually does have an ability that he can gain attack. So let's say he attacked and destroyed an enemy card. He'll gain 1 attack until the start of your next turn. If you wanted something physical to track that, you could just go grab one of these orange cards for an attack boost. And the same thing if he had gained some defense. You could just grab one of these purple ones to track the defense. These are just there for player convenience. Like I said, they're not absolutely necessary. I like using the green ones for HP to keep track of that, because you definitely need something to track the HP of a card if it's damaged but not destroyed, just to remind both players what their current HP is. But usually, effects like this, he's gaining 1 attack until the start of your next turn. Typically, that's easy enough to remember. He's usually only going to be getting 1, maybe 2 extra attack that way, and it's usually going to be easy enough to just keep track of in your head, because it's like this one is fully temporary. There are some cards that will permanently gain extra attack or defense under certain conditions, where you might actually want to use one of these to keep track of that, but once again, these are just convenience things. So yeah, that should pretty much be everything to go over. I've gone over all the rules, how to set up the board. I think I've hopefully explained all of the rules visually well enough to be understood. And yeah, so the game is just going to go back and forth with both players taking turns until somebody wins. Like, so let's say, for example, their keep is all the way down to 1 HP. Like, it's been attacked and attacked and attacked. It's my turn, and I would just declare an attack with the Elf Assassin or the Beast Folk Runner here, do the last damage to the keep, take it down to 0, and I win. That's... Yep. And that's just... that's how a game would go. Yeah. So hopefully that was a good enough explanation of Blitzkeep, how to play, what it's all about. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments. I'd be happy to answer them. And this video should be coinciding with the game being available in the Steam Workshop for Tabletop Simulator. So go ahead and go check it out there. Or if you're checking out this video from that workshop page, because I will link this there as a how to play video. Hello, welcome. This is my YouTube channel. Feel free to check it out. I've got a little bit of everything. Got some videos of me playing some video games. Got some D&D character builds. I got a little bit of this, a little bit of that. I will, of course, be covering a lot more Blitzkeep. I'll be doing some development updates here and there, and I might just be playing some games back and forth, either at test games against myself. I might have videos where I'm playing with a friend, or against, some random other person on the internet who downloaded my game. Who knows? But yeah, that'll just about do it for this video. So I will sign off here. I will say I'll see you guys next time. Later!